national disaster, it means you're going to have to government gazette it. And it will allow you to issue regulations and or directives. If you could give us some sort of idea of what the regulations and directives would entail. Thank you.
Thanks. Minister.
Baya, thank you for the questions posed. I think I will start with the one on the regulations, combining it with what are the requirements to declare a national disaster. As you are all aware, the process of a declaration is a process that is prescribed in the Disaster Management Act of 2002. And these processes are appropriately spelled out in the National Disaster Management Framework of 2005. Firstly, as I have informed you in the briefing, the three provinces, Western Cape, Northern Cape, and Eastern Cape, they have declared a provincial state of disaster. Now, the first step that we need to do, guided by the provision of this act, is to reclassify those provincial classification into a national classification. And that empowers us then to start looking at the necessary requirement that should be in place for us then to declare the state of a national disaster. So that particular process is a process that is appropriately spelled out in the Act. It's not something that can be done without following the prescriptive of the Act. Now, the regulations, of course, might touch on areas of bylaws, might touch on areas like guidance on procurement. We will be moving, of course, to deal with all identified impediments in terms of spending, the allocations that have been given to provinces as well as municipalities to deal with this unfortunate situation. Remember, we have indicated that last year, just as an example, because it was not only an allocation that was made in the Western Cape, we allocated 74, plus minus 74 million to the Western Cape. And when we checked in December, only 24, just above 24% of that allocation was utilized. Digging deep in our engagement with the province, we realized that some of the impediments range from procurement processes, but also strict provisions that are there in our supply chain management systems. So it's very clear that we might have to look into those regulations going forward. And of course, giving some directive on how some of the things should be expedited from the center, which will be the National Disaster Management Center. Look, the issue of communication, managing a disaster is a very, very legislatively prescribed process. And of course, the Act is very clear on the structure of communication that should be put in place, but not only of communication, of coordination that should be put in place when we deal with such situation. And I must indicate that these structures have been in existence. It's not like the structures that are activated because of this unfortunate situation. These are the very same structures that we use to positively deal with challenges, other weather-related challenges or climate-related challenges that we picked up in the past. We have dealt with floods using the same structures. We have dealt with fires. Just recently, we concluded one of the major fire challenge that was encountered in this country, the fires of Naisna and the surrounding areas. We used these structures to deal with such challenges. And these structures are the same structures that we'll continue to use even to manage the current unfortunate situation. Now, look, it's an ideal situation for us to have a centralized communication provision platform. And that's what we are encouraging all the spheres to do, because we can't give confusing messages to our communities. During times of emergencies and disasters, it's important for us to simplify our communication, but also to minimize any tendency that will promote uncertainty within our people. Not only within our people, but also within those who might be coming to our country as tourists, who might also be coming to our country as investors. So it's important for us to make sure that our communication is simple, but also our communication is not ambiguous. But we also talk the same language. That's an ideal situation. But now you see, political parties, they will always have their view. It's difficult, to control political parties. We will advise and urge political parties to communicate responsibly, because failure to communicate responsibly might exacerbate the same problem that we are trying to resolve. So it's our plea as the Inter-Ministerial Task Team on Drought to all political parties that let's communicate responsibly when we deal with this unfortunate situation. But equally important, let's use reliable sources of information that are working around this matter. So as we communicate research information at the expense of any information that might distort our intervention as the government of the day. So I think that's our plea to all political parties. But indeed, we are committed, and this is the commitment that we received from all spheres of government yesterday, that we will try our level best to make sure that communication is centralized, but also we communicate the same message as we communicate with our peoples, as we communicate with other role players in our communities. I think the other questions, it's the agriculture one, I think we'll handle that.
Thanks.
We'll send the invoice after this process. This is hard labor, by the way.
Thanks. I think the question relates to what is the department intending to do to make sure that there's continued food production, notwithstanding the impact of drought. And I would like in that space to thank the farmers broadly, because with the last drought they've been able to boost production, because they have understood the fact that you have to apply certain restrictive measures. One, the time at which you irrigate. You don't irrigate during the sunny day, during the day, because you will also get that water evaporated. Two is to working with the research institutions. Already we have been able to come up with a drought-resistant maize that is we're able to withstand 20% of drought. But I think the work is ongoing to find other measures, because as a water-scarce country, with advent of drought, we need to ensure that our people are ready. We need to ensure that we check what can be planted when, and how do we make sure that that research keeps on going, and also ensure that we reduce the numbers of livestock, because once you have got bigger numbers, then that impact on the availability of grazing. Those are issues that I think will continue engaging our farmers, and to comply with the call from the Department of Water and Sanitation to ensure that when they are called upon to restrict the usage of water, they comply. And I know that our farmers have been part of the program, and they've been participating, and they've been complying. And I think led by the national organizations that organizes farmers, they have been in contact with the Minister of Water and Sanitation. And we would at all times plea with them that we need to ensure that agriculture as a changing feature needs to embrace technology and innovation so that we're able to do things in conformity with the challenges we are faced with.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and those that are in Tshwane. The issue that has been raised about day zero, should day zero come, will people have to go and fetch water in the different pickup points? Firstly, I think what Comrade Des, the Minister, had alluded to, the need for us to have a common message that says we're a water scarce country, we have overused our surface water, and we have not been able to manage water demand, and we still have those that are as yet to be served, and therefore it is upon all of us to behave differently, change the behavior, do things differently, reuse water, recycle water. The day zero approach is what we do not want to have as a country, and it is something that we believe that it can be avoided. In the event where there is excessive shortage of water into the system, of course, in line with the disaster management plan, you then have to improvise and put up the infrastructure. And of course, in any disaster, you also have to adapt and walk to a particular point and collect water and save water and not fill your swimming pool. There are simple things that we can start not doing. Filling your swimming pool, getting into a bath every day, for you not to then reach a point where there is absolutely no water. It is also not acceptable for people to be comfortable to pay their water bills that are more than 2,000 rands and up to 8,000 rand a month, all because people can afford to pay. That is also not supposed to be. And therefore, the most important thing is water conservation and demand management. And the collection points are done in line with the plans of every municipality. And every household, every neighborhood then gets informed on how things have to be done in the event we reach that stage. I was sharing with some people how all of us have grown up in that kind of an environment, but also in South Africa you still have thousands of South Africans who still walk outside of their yards to fetch water. And it can only be avoided, especially for those who are used to be having water in the yards, to change the behavior and ensure, therefore, that these things are not done. On the directives, some of the issues that are going to be in the directives coming from us in water and sanitation may be also the periodic release of water, so that then the system can be able to refill itself. Secondly, it may be directives to municipalities to adhere to the restrictions that are being given, like your increase now to 45% for domestic and industrial use, that municipalities must adhere to. Thirdly, it would have to be through the Systems Act and the Disaster Management Act, us in water, looking at the possibility of accessing water that is in privately owned areas, in line with the Constitution, so that then we take water as a national resource that is needed for all. The fourth thing would be to issue directives that also encourage the use of grey water. Already through COPTA, we have gone out to look at the state of our wastewater treatment plants, and there are municipalities in South Africa that have already started to use grey water. So the directives also give different interventions that would have to be done and different solutions and most importantly, they become integrated from environment to health to agriculture, the department of the education sector, as well as the transport sector in terms of the movement of water in our roads and streets, and lastly, the commodification of water.
Pretoria, last round.
No question, Chairperson.
Thanks. Cape Town, last one. Let's start at the back.
My name is Bulelani from SABC. Maybe, I'm not sure who is going to take the question. I suspect maybe Minister Van Rooyen. The issue of declaring this drought and water shortages as a national disaster, I suspect that should also come with a budget in terms of resourcing. Has the department worked out as to how much may be needed to actually, limit the effects of the crisis? And the second thing to Minister Mogonyane, one of the considerations you are raising in your answer is the issue of regulating the issue of private dams. Now, can you give us an example? How do you regulate a private entity? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mia from NCA. Minister Mogonyane, just firstly, what new plans are there to get more water online in Cape Town and by when? And just about the Klein Willem Dam, when will it be done?
I'm Minister Beauregard from the Mining Guardian. Mr. Van Rooyen, just with respect to the declaring this a national disaster, how specifically is this different to the coordinated effort between national government and provincial government and even local governments? I'm looking for the specifics of how this is going to affect the actual response to the drought. And also then, Minister Mogonyane, with respect to the dams, yesterday I heard a starting number which I've heard via the way about the fact that national government has 300 plus dams and there are more than 4,000 dams in this country. Can you just give us some clarity on that?
Minister, you speak about the fact that we're quite anti-commodifying water. If you could give us some examples of exactly what you're referring to.
Please use.
Oh, do you want to do it again?
Yes, so that you're on record there.
Oh.
Hi, my name is Renata from CGTN. I just want to find out, Minister, 2 weeks ago when you were here, you made it clear that you were not really a fan of the whole day zero concept. And you also were very anti the commodification of water. If you can just explain exactly what you mean about that.
Okay.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Yazid Kamaldin. I'm representing the Weekend Argus newspaper. For the Water and Sanitation Minister, can you please tell us if the Umgeni project is going ahead at the waterfront, the desalination project, what is happening there? And then, 59% of our dams nationally being, that's the percentage of water in our dams. So what are the plans around, making sure that we have more water security? Because Tony over here, when he presented his government information, he said billions are being lost, for example, with the infrastructure, leaks and so on. We as consumers are constantly being told to save water, but what is being done from a government side to ensure also, just last night I saw a water leak in Athlone, a fire hydrant, for example. So we also need to know from government what government is doing about water security, And then the last question, 74.8 million given to the Western Cape government, saying, for example, they're not spending it, but then also saying, it's because of what sounds like the red tape, the paperwork holding it up. So then, what should they be doing? What should they be doing with that 74.8 million? What is that money for? Thank you.
Two questions.
Minister Zukwana, Jolene van Wyk of London Weekend Magazine. Minister, I'm just thinking now, if
the drought is going to be declared a national disaster, how are you going to ensure that farmers on the ground in those drought-stricken areas, that they get optimal relief, that most of the money go basically to relieve the drought on the ground and not like the situation before, a year or two, I think 2 years ago, where there was also drought relief money, where the service providers, that they end up, like one example, be able to afford to buy a Bentley. Thank you.
Last one.
It's Noelia from Power FM. Just to touch on what my colleague over here said earlier on the 74.8 million that was given to the City of Cape Town. Minister Mokonyane, we do know that the Office of the Mayor had asked you to hold off on intervening in the City of Cape Town. Has this since changed? And can you give us an update following the meeting with Premier Helen Zille earlier this week?
Thank you once more for all the questions. I think the second round was more of a breakthrough of questions. Thank you very much for those questions. The issue of how much, the result of the matter is that provision for such unfortunate eventualities is an annual thing. If you remember, in his budget speech last year, the Minister of Finance then confirmed that for last year to this year, financial year, because we got what we term provincial disaster grant, as well as the municipal disaster grant. The allocations for the provincial disaster grant was 213.4 million, and for municipal disaster grant was 300.6 million. For this year, I mean for the next coming financial year, 2018-2019, provincial disaster grant stands at 130 because of the budget cuts that you are all aware of, and municipal disaster grant stands of course, it has been increased to 370. Now, the result of the matter is that this is your normal allocation. And when you look at some of the interventions, like just the one, I will cite just one project, desalination. If we are to kickstart that project into one of the affected areas, it might require from the fiscus plus minus 400 million. Plus minus 400 million. The last time I checked the market value of such a project. So it suggests that we will be forced to make presentation to National Treasury, which we have done, because climate change effects really require of us to be proactive to a certain extent. So we hope that as the minister delivers his budget speech.
So live there on that briefing from the Inter-Ministerial Task Team, briefing the media on the drought and the water scarcity in the Cape. We've been listening there to Cooperative Governance Minister Des van Rooyen, as well as Water and Sanitation Minister Nomvula Mokonyane, talking about the various challenges they've been facing and that they are going to declare this drought a national disaster. They've said that nationally the dam levels are below 60%. They're at 59%. So we've been listening to some of the measures that are being implemented to try and ease the crisis. Some of those measures include water conservation and demand management, desalination, the change of timing of cultivation and irrigation, and reduction of water usage by industries and other users such as crop farmers. Just some of the measures that have been implemented. But Minister Nomvula Mokonyane saying that one of their biggest issues is that in order to avoid day zero, there needs to be a common message so as to avoid ambiguity when it comes to communicating the depth of this crisis. She said essentially we have overused our groundwater supply and that we are unable to meet the current demand. She says that we have to do things differently. As a water scarce country, we have to change our water usage habits. So just in a nutshell, what has come out of that briefing as the Inter-Ministerial Task Team has met today in Parliament to discuss a way forward in dealing with this crisis.